The city had seen storms before, but not like this. Behind the glass towers and the orderly violence of boardrooms, a billionaire known only as the Silent One was days from collapse. He had not spoken in public for decades. He had built an empire on sealed doors and signed initials. And then, out of nowhere, a woman no one noticed. A librarian from a town the maps forgot, clutching an old book he once donated. Between its faded pages, she found something that could save him, or erase everything he ever built. Before we begin, subscribe so you don't miss stories where power, mystery, and fate collide in ways you don't expect. And tell me in the comments, if the secret to a billionaire's empire fell into your hands, would you hide it, or set it free? Rain arrived as a gray sheet, scraping the skyline into smudged charcoal. In the tower with the private elevator that stopped at a floor without a number, Alexander Armitage watched water crawl down glass like veins. It seemed fitting, storms ran in lines and so did fear. Silence had worked for him for 30 years. No interviews, no speeches, no soundbite to be clipped and twisted and fed to a world that preferred blood to truth. When his wife died and the headlines devoured her, he sealed his voice away and let his companies talk for him instead. Markets spoke in numbers, numbers could be shaped. The world called it aloofness. He called it survival. He could feel survival thinning the way fabric thins when fingers worry the same place for years. Rivals smelled it. The board did not say, "We doubt you," but their eyes did. A group of activists had taken a massive position against his energy holdings. A conglomerate from East Asia had circled his logistics arm with a takeover that looked like a merger if you didn't know what a knife disguised as a handshake felt like. Alexander knew. He had a plan. The last plan, the one he had sworn not to use because using it meant he had failed to find another way. He called it Solstice. He had written it longhand in a leather ledger because some things must be inked where no server can betray them. He had hidden the ledger among donated books because arrogance is louder than care and his enemies were arrogant. He told himself he would retrieve it when the moment came. In the town that trains pass without slowing, the library's roof ticked under rain. The building smelled of wet paper and lemon cleaner that only pretended to work. Evelyn March moved through stacks with the grace of someone who knew the little griefs of inanimate things. Cracked spines, yellowed edges, the quiet protest of old glue. She placed a plastic bucket where the ceiling surrendered and kept cataloging, because in places like this there is always more work than time. She wore a gray sweater washed thin at the elbows and a ponytail that defeated her each morning but looked like a decision from a distance. People said hello to her in the grocery store without remembering her name 10 minutes later. It didn't sting the way it once did. Simply was. The crates arrived without warning, stamped Armitage Foundation in efficient black. It wasn't unusual. When the foundation cleared an estate library, anything not valuable enough for auction found its way to small towns. Evelyn signed as rain freckled the paperwork and rolled a dolly across linoleum that wanted to split. The first box held travel guides from the 80s and a field journal from some long-closed expedition. The second held mildewed novels that made her heart both hurt and soften. The third, heavier, reluctant, held a large ledger with a spine rubbed down to initials that could have been anyone's if you didn't know the weight of certain letters. She almost smiled at the coincidence. Then she opened it. Handwriting that didn't apologize. Angular, decisive, fast when it wanted, precise when it needed. Sketches of grids that were not architecture but supply chains turned into art. Notes in the margins arguing with the main text as if two minds had fought and one had agreed to lose for now. Dates. Some back when this library's thermostat still worked. Some recent enough to make her sit down on the low stool by the return bin and hold the book as if it were a small animal. A word repeated, Solstice. The first section read like strategy disguised as memoir. The second read like blueprints for a world not yet here. Riddled through both were coded strings of letters and numbers that felt like coordinates to a future only one person had seen. She thought of treasure maps and laughed at herself, low and without joy. Then she saw an index card tucked inside, half slid between pages the way people mark places they intend to return to. On it, in the same hand, if you're reading this and you're not me, you're either the person I chose, or the reason I lost. Safe distance until physics wins. She told herself she would just peek again later, and later came at closing. She read for 3 hours with a pen she never put on paper, an old habit from exam days when writing answers in the margins would have been cheating. She read names of shell companies that formed a constellation if you connected them, a constellation that spelled solstice when she squinted. She read about an acquisition that had looked like hubris but had been positioning. She read about a line of credit extended to a small R&D company in Norway with a patent family whose applications had been delayed by accident in quotes, underlined. She read steps that ended with an unambiguous phrase, "Speak, once." She slept badly and dreamed of numbers melting like rain on glass. In the tower, Alexander's right hand, Victor Halloway, slid a report across a desk that had cost more than Evelyn's library budget for 3 years. "They're gathering proxies," he said. "They think you've lost the plot. They're ready to sell to Tenjo Logistics. We can stop it with Solstice, if we move." Alexander didn't answer. He touched the edge of the paper as if testing whether it would bleed him. His silence with Victor had never been personal. Victor knew the language of it. This silence was a listening, not a refusal. Alexander was listening for something only he could hear, the click of pieces he had set years ago finally lining up. He had hidden Solstice where hunters wouldn't think to hunt. Hunters do not prowl librarians' desks. Victor pressed. "I know you don't want to surface this until the last second, but they'll vote in 6 days. If we haven't..." Alexander lifted a hand. Victor stopped. Alexander wrote a single line on the corner of the report, "Retrieve ledger." By late morning, no ledger was where it should have been. The Foundation office called 3 branch libraries. The driver who'd hauled crates swore he had followed instructions. Somewhere in the route a signature had smeared. Somewhere a ledger had slipped sideways into a town built of sideways things. Clara noticed the way Evelyn hugged the desk when a teenager asked for printer paper. She noticed the way Evelyn closed her eyes for a second when a truck outside downshifted too sharply, as if her body expected impact. Clara had a soft spot for the invisible, but she had a soft spot for drama too. She waited until Evelyn went to check an inventory and back, and then she looked. Just a corner of leather, a suggestion of weight. She pulled and found a ledger that made her breath hitch for reasons she didn't understand yet. She opened to the middle and read a paragraph she did not understand at all, but felt the way people feel a weather change when a storm is still an hour away. Names. Armitage used subsidiaries that had made the news. Something called Solstice that sounded like religion and algorithm at once. She closed the book when she heard Evelyn returning and pasted on a smile that didn't land all the way. "You okay? You look like someone told you the heating is finally fixed." Evelyn replied, "I think I made a mistake and I can't tell if it's going to ruin me or save me." Clara waited until after closing to call someone who liked to be called when other people found things. He ran 3 real estate offices, a pawn shop, and 2 charities that gave away just enough to make his name feel like a good deed in his mouth. She told herself she was protecting Evelyn by getting an expert opinion. It sounded almost true. The man arrived the next day in a coat that tried too hard and a smile that tried harder. He asked to see the donation list for tax purposes. He admired the leaks. He called Evelyn by her first name before she told it to him because men like him never learned how to be introduced. He did not see the ledger. Evelyn had moved it into a safe place no one would think to look. The children's section behind picture books in a shelf so low adults forgot to bend. She felt both ridiculous and clever. She also felt watched. That night she wrote a letter. She did not address it to public emails because those were sieves. She addressed it to the smallest address listed on the Foundation's most boring page. A P.O. box they used for out-of-season donations and complaints. She wrote the letter in code because the ledger had taught her a new tongue. She built each sentence from the structure of Solstice's own notes, the way a singer takes a melody and returns it politely. She said, "I have something that belongs to you. I'm not your enemy. They're coming." She said it in math. 4 days passed. On the 5th afternoon, when the sky had the woolly look of snow deciding whether to commit, a man stood just inside the library door. He had the posture of a former athlete and a haircut that meant budget had never been a problem. He did not carry an umbrella because someone had opened a black one over his head between curb and door and disappeared when their usefulness ended. He did not say his name. He set a card on the desk with no writing on it and said quietly, "Miss March, your letter was received." She felt every small muscle in her body decide whether to lock or flee. She chose neither. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been sent to make sure you don't get hurt carrying a thing that weighs more than it looks." That's not comforting. It wasn't meant to be. It was meant to be honest. She hesitated then, where? Where the cameras don't live. She had always hated that the only things in her life sharp enough to cut arrived without warning. The garden sat behind a museum that ran on bequests and dust. It was winter spare, branches like sketch marks, a path of crushed stone, the smell of metal that belonged to weather and to money. He was waiting on a bench that faced a pond you could walk across if you were willing to break ice and ankles. She recognized him not because she had seen his picture. No one had a recent one, but because some people carry their names like a temperature. Alexander Armitage looked like an answer that did not intend to justify itself. She sat at the far end of the bench as if the space between them could be sued for negligence. He did not reach, he did not thank, he did not apologize. He said in a voice that had not made public work in 30 years, "You should not have this." "I didn't steal it. That's not what I said. You would have lost it if I had been someone else." He turned his head, slow, an old predator checking the wind. "Are you someone else?" "I'm a librarian in a town that doesn't remember my last name." "I'm not sure who that makes me to you." "It makes you the difference between a move and a mistake." She swallowed dry. "They know, Mr. Armitage. Not everything, not the code, but enough to smell that something here matters. I think one of them is paying a visit tomorrow with a donation he hopes I accept and a threat he doesn't plan to say out loud. I will handle people who like to knock with money. What I cannot handle is a ledger and play where cameras might find it. People will get hurt who don't understand why. Like me. Like you. Then take it." He didn't move. "No. Not yet." "What?" "If they think I have it, they move to plan B. We're not ready for plan B. You're using me as a decoy. I'm asking you to be harder to use." "And how do I do that?" "You let me show you the rules of a game you have already been entered in." She wanted to stand, to leave, to go back to the smell of old paper and the kind of tired that came from shelving and not from fear. Instead she said, "I don't like being handled." "I don't like being hunted," he answered. "And yet here we are." He introduced Victor Halloway with a nod. Victor stepped out from a path line of yews like a stagehand who'd been waiting for a cue that never came. He had cheeks that flushed when weather or anger required it and a smile that stayed in his pocket until he was certain it would land. He said, "Miss March, we need to talk about solstice." She whispered, "Everyone keeps saying that word like it's a country whose passport I forgot to stamp." Victor's smile moved an inch. "It's a power market architecture. Control the distribution frame, you control the story of scarcity. The people trying to remove Mr. Armitage are betting he lost the story. He didn't. He wrote a new one. But we never put it on a server because the last time we did that, a reporter printed my phone number and we had to move mothers out of apartments in the middle of the night. And you dropped it in a donation crate." "No," Alexander said, and it was nearly a growl. "I placed it where thieves of a certain kind do not look. Academia teaches a particular arrogance. It makes people deaf to the idea that the one thing they ignore might be the thing I care most about." "Then you didn't account for people like me," Evelyn said. "People who look because looking is not a job but a way to move through the day without falling down." Something shifted in Alexander's face then. Something minuscule, like light finding a sliver into a room built to stay dark. "I accounted for you," he said. "I just didn't expect you to be real." The man from the real estate offices came the next morning with a check large enough to fix 3 roofs and a promise so clean you could cut your finger on it. He ran his palm across the circulation desk like a landlord. "Libraries are such honest places," he said, tasting the word honest as if he wasn't sure whether he liked it. "You must get so many old things here. It would be a shame if you didn't have what you need to keep them safe." "We do our best," Evelyn said and smiled with all her teeth. Shyness had lived in her like furniture for so long she had forgotten she could move it. He lowered his voice. "I'm looking for a book. A ledger, actually. Belongs to a friend who would be very grateful to get it back. Maybe there's a finder's fee. Maybe there's a job elsewhere. Maybe this town doesn't have to be your only horizon." Evelyn folded the check once, twice and slid it back. "We don't check out ledgers without library cards," she said. He laughed. "Cute. I'll come back with a card." He left with a shrug and a glance at her hair the way men glance when they intend to use that glance later if needed. Evelyn waited until he turned the corner and then locked the door, closed the blinds and told Mr. Boyd that the library had a sudden plumbing emergency. She pulled the ledger from between a picture book about bears who plant gardens and another about a mouse who learns to be brave, and she wrapped it in plain paper and tied it with twine because some things deserve ritual even when you're terrified. Victor met her at the back, no suit, just a wool coat that belonged to a man who knew Dawn from the other side. They drove in a car that made no sound. The city gathered around them, growing in height and temperature until the air itself tasted like electricity. They went not to the numbered floor but to a door behind an unmarked stair that opened into a suite designed by someone who knew the word quiet in 3 languages. Alexander stood by a wall of screens, none of them on. He preferred to know those surfaces were blind until he personally told them to see. He extended a hand not to take the ledger but to touch it, briefly, as if confirming it existed without laying claim. "Thank you," he said, the words small but heavy. He turned to Victor. "Now we can begin." What followed unfolded like a heist planned by mathematicians. A vote was set for Monday to remove him as chair under the mask of stewardship transition. The proxy fight was nearly done. The board members not already bought were exhausted by the thought of fighting the narrative. Alexander would not fight the narrative, he would replace it. Solstice wasn't only technology, it was a new form of pricing disclosure that would make 3 of his biggest rivals look like they had been stealing from their own shareholders, which technically they had, but legally they had not until someone made it visible. "What do you need me for?" Evelyn asked, aware she had just walked into a war and been promoted from civilian to something else without consent. Victor slid a sheet toward her, a diagram that looked like a child's drawing of a daisy if a child drew with calculus. "He built Solstice to live offline. The capstone is a phrase written in your ledger that only triggers if entered by the hand that last moved it. It's a superstition," he admitted, shooting Alexander a look. "But in this building we pay attention to the rituals of the man who built it." Alexander did not explain himself. He merely said, "Will you help?" "If I say no?" "Then we will still find a way," he said, and she believed him, "but it will be messier, and it will be uglier, and people in your orbit may get pulled in anyway." She signed the NDA Victor handed her, knowing it meant little in a world where screens could make any letter look like a lie. She did not sign because of paper. She signed because she did not like bullies, and some of the names in that ledger had bullied entire countries without using fists. They worked. Nights soldered to days. Small cups of coffee that tasted like burnt decisions. Victor teaching her how to stand in rooms that judged shoes. Alexander giving her one-liners that meant 5 moves ahead. She learned to ask, "What do we gain if we lose?" Because sometimes that's the only question that tells the truth. She learned that board members were children with checkbooks when scared. She learned that wealth is a language with dialects. She learned how to code switch without letting it scrape her voice. Clara called, panicked. Men came by. They asked if you'd left town. They asked if there was a back entrance. I told them to donate to the roof fund and stop chewing their gum that loud. Evelyn said, "Thank you," and meant it more than her tone could carry. She gave Clara a number that would answer at 3 a.m. She told her to keep the lights on even if no one walked in. Fear likes the dark. The first attack arrived as an article with a photograph of the library's exterior taken in such a way that the gutters looked like hunger. The headline, "Silent Billionaire's Secret Stash Found in Failing Public Library." The piece was full of "sources say" and "experts speculate," which is how you print lies that can't be sued. Commenters called Evelyn a thief and a mistress and a plant and a saint. She turned off her phone for an hour and learned that her heart could keep beating without the consent of strangers. When she turned it back on, there were 8 messages from numbers that didn't show names and one from Clara that said, "You're not alone." Also, "The roof is leaking" in periodicals again. Alexander read the article and did not swear. He did not need to. The room swore for him. Victor said, "They're trying to force you to move before you have your footing." "Then let them think we're falling," Alexander said. "One more day. Then we break the floor." Sunday night tasted like battery acid. Lawyers called and spoke in paragraphs that made nobody safer. A man from the rival conglomerate sent flowers to the library with a note. "We wish you well in your future endeavors." Clara took the vase, poured out the water, and filled it with nails. Evelyn slept on a couch no one had sat on because furniture in rooms like this exists as suggestion, not comfort. She woke to a hand on the back of the couch that did not touch her, just anchored itself near her head the way people anchor boats near storms. Alexander stood looking out at a city that mist made mythic. "You are braver than our people," he said. "I am too tired to be scared." "That counts. Why did you stop speaking?" He did not answer for long enough that she thought he would not. Then, "When they hit my wife they told me they were just doing their jobs. Words were knives and they told me they were cutlery." "I'm sorry," she said, "because there are sentences that cannot be returned with anything else, and because sorry is not apology when you say it for a wound that wasn't your hand. Tomorrow you have to use knives." "I know." The boardroom was designed for power to feel inevitable. A table the size of a ship's deck. Chairs that embraced and trapped. Glass that made the city look like it belonged to the people sitting here. Camera crews outside because the rumor mill had printed invitations for them. The chairman pro tem cleared his throat for the microphone and spoke in that cadence men learn at expensive schools where cruelty is taught as certainty. "Mr. Armitage, the time has come to consider transition." Alexander stood. He did not press the little button. He did not need amplification. Silence amplified him. He placed the ledger on the table the way men place guns in old movies and said, "No." The word stopped a room built to never stop. He spoke. The first sentence was gravel and then it was steel. He did not explain the past, he did not confess. He narrated. He called his enemies by name and did not call them enemies. He described behaviors that sounded like crimes because some crimes are legal until someone names them as acts. He showed diagrams not as slides but as movements, as if he were conducting and the air were violin. He told a story about scarcity that ended with the line, "You were sold a drought in a warehouse full of water." He did not smile. He did not plead. He showed a document, solstice, condensed, cut to the bone, filed through channels so public that even lawyers cannot bury them without getting their hands dirty in front of trained eyes. Evelyn watched faces change. Greed is a weather pattern, she could see wind shift. A board member who had trained his mouth to curl into disdain curled it into interest instead. Another who had intended to vote against Alexander began to calculate how much money she could make if she didn't. The rival CFO texted too quickly and the message landed where it shouldn't have. Victor received it on a screen he had prepared 5 years ago for exactly this. A confession disguised as an instruction. The confession now lived in a file that would make 3 regulators wake without coffee. The man from the real estate offices found his way into the building because buildings like this always admit money with a face. He slipped down a service corridor and into a side room where the ledger lay unattended for 60 seconds too long. He reached for it and found a woman's hand on it first. Clara looked at him the way librarians look at people who write in books with pen. "Don't," she said. He smiled. "Cute." He reached again. She did not move her hand. 2 security officers materialized with the soundless speed of people trained to make danger feel like mistake. They made the man into a removal and then into an absence. Clara picked up the ledger, hugged it, and whispered to it like it was a cat, "You're okay." The vote failed. Or rather, it succeeded in the wrong direction for people who had expected it to go one way. Alexander remained chair by a margin that would look narrow on paper and feel enormous in bank accounts by morning. Reporters outside shuffled their questions to match a new narrative. The silent billionaire speaks. Markets listen. One asked Evelyn if she was his mistress. She looked at the woman as if she were a broken printer and said pleasantly, "I'm the head librarian," and went inside. They did not celebrate. They returned to the suite and collapsed into the kind of quiet that follows surgery. Victor opened a bottle somebody once gave him when they thought they were buying future favors. He poured 3 glasses and said, "To rituals that make no sense and therefore work." Evelyn barely sipped. The adrenaline left and left her cold. She thought of her library and of Mr. Boyd falling asleep at nonfiction and of the mouse who learned to be brave. She thought of the check she had folded and returned. She thought of how being seen without your permission is not the same as being known. "I want to go home," she said. "Of course," Alexander answered, and he said it as if home were a place you can point to and not a weather you carry. They drove at an hour that left roads to insomniacs and to trucks that make city life possible while city people sleep. The library sat dark as a closed eye. Clara had left a note under the door. "If the world ends again, I'll bring coffee." Evelyn stepped inside and felt the building breathe a little exhale made of old paper and new relief. They went to the children's section because rituals demand repetition. She slid the ledger back where it had once hidden and then pulled it out again and handed it to Alexander. "Now?" he asked. "Now," she said. "You don't need decoys anymore." He took it like a man takes a thing he thought he would never touch again. He did not thank her, not because he didn't feel thanks but because some feelings do not know how to fit into that small word. He looked around at the place she had kept alive by force of will and small budget and the stubbornness of people who like things that cannot be monetized without ruining them, and he said, "What do you want, Miss March? I can't pay you for what you did. That would be an insult. I can only ask. Keep this place from dying," she said, surprising herself with how quickly the answer rose. "Fix the roof. Fix the heating. Pay Clara more than gratitude. Let children sit on a floor without seeing their breath in winter. Do it quietly. If your name has to be on a plaque, make it small. Call it a foundation with my name too so people think I helped more than I did." Victor smiled into his glass. "She negotiates like she's been here for years." "I've been here a week," she said. "A long one." He made it so. Not with a press release but with a grant disguised as a bequest from a woman who had loved books and died in another state. Contractors arrived and found budgets that did not sting. Volunteers arrived and found cold replaced by warmth. The town arrived and found itself, surprised by the luxury of a well-maintained building that asked nothing but attention. A small brass plaque appeared by the door, so modest you had to be looking to find it. The March, Armitage Foundation for Knowledge. The dash meant more than the names. Life continued because that is what life does when people are not trying to kill it. Solstice rolled out not as a product but as an inevitability. Journalists wrote like they'd always believed in it. Rivals settled. Two went to prison for things unrelated but morally adjacent. The board became respectful in the way cowards are respectful when consequences teach them manners. Alexander spoke 3 more times in the space of a year, each time choosing words as if they cost him blood. He found that they did not. He found that silence had protected him until it didn't. He found that voice could be used without being used up. He visited the library in a coat that did not invite conversation. He stood near the stacks and watched a little boy read to his mother with the solemnity of a new priest. He stood near the desk while Evelyn and Clara debated whether the summer program should include a workshop on fixing bicycles or building birdhouses. He stood near the window where rain had once come in and saw only glass that kept weather in its lane. "You did this," he said to Evelyn, not looking at her. "You did," she said. "I just kept a thing safe for a while." He nodded. "I'll keep it safe now." "Which? The ledger or the world?" "Yes," he said, and for the first time she heard humor in him, thin as spring sunlight but there. Even peace tests its fences. Months later a journalist came with a smile and a story angle that looked like kindness until you read the second paragraph. She wanted to write, the human side of the silent billionaire's savior. "Savior," Evelyn said and almost laughed. I shelved. I made tea. I told a bully no. "That's a savior," the journalist insisted, itchy for a headline. "It's a librarian," Evelyn said, and then said no to the interview because there are doors you keep closed not to hide what is inside but to protect it from weather that thinks it is news. At night, when the building slept, she sometimes sat by the window and read the ledger's one page that had been copied for her. A page that held not numbers but a paragraph he had written in a moment that surprised him. It wasn't addressed to her, it wasn't addressed to anyone. It said, "I built something too high to hear the street. If I fall, let the person who finds this be someone who knows how to listen." She folded the page carefully every time and put it back in a folder marked Programming Ideas 2026 because misdirection is a kind of love. She locked the office and walked home under a sky that didn't threaten rain for once. He called sometimes. Not often. They talked in a language neither of them spoke well but that they were willing to learn. He asked what books children were fighting over. She asked whether energy could be made less cruel. He came to the fundraiser that didn't use the word fundraiser anywhere on the flyer. He bid on a pie and overpaid by a factor of absurd. He stayed long enough to hear the after-cleaning laughter that comes when work is done and nobody wants to go home yet because for a minute the place feels like the center of a map. On the anniversary of the vote, Victor sent her a text. "Still standing." She replied, "So is the roof." He answered with a photo of a newspaper clipped to a fridge with a magnet shaped like a daisy. The headline, "Energy Market Stabilize as New Framework Gains Global Adoption." The byline of a journalist who had once written with knives now wrote with awe. People can change, she told herself, and let the thought sit without poking holes in it. There were other fights, smaller, pettier. A city councilor wanted to cut the library hours because someone else needed a parking lot. A blogger insisted the foundation was a front for mind control because conspiracy is free entertainment when you don't have the money for the other kind. A man tried to sell counterfeit copies of the ledger online, each with different secrets to unlock for a subscription fee. Clara printed the ad and pinned it to the break room cork board with a sticky note. If only he knew it's just notes about coffee ratios and world domination. Evelyn did not become rich. She did not move to a city where taxis come in under a minute. She did not marry a billionaire or a journalist or a man from the pawn shop. She bought a better coat. She learned to say no without apologizing first. She learned that invisibility is not character. It is a trick other people play when they are too busy to notice. She learned she liked being noticed by the right people exactly as much as she liked not being noticed by the wrong ones. Sometimes she dreamed of the first day the crates arrived, of the smell of wet cardboard and the sick thrill of seeing her reflection stretched in rain on glass. Sometimes she dreamed of the garden where he had said you should not have this and she had said but I do. In the dream, he handed her not the ledger but a pair of earplugs, and she laughed herself awake without understanding why. In the morning she knew, some silences you choose and some choose you. The trick is deciding which ones you keep. When the library held its grand reopening, there was no ribbon cutting. Ribbons are for cameras. There was a door propped open with a brick that had once been part of the wall before the contractor discovered rot and made something new. People walked in and all of them said the same first sentence. "It smells different." And all of them meant the same thing. It smells like a place that can afford to remember what it is. Children raced to the beanbags. Mr. Boyd cried where no one could see him and then loudly asked where the biographies were as if he had never left. Clara stood at the desk with a tiara from the costume box on her head and told anyone who would listen that fines were forgiven for a month because grace is policy if you write it down. Alexander arrived late, unremarked, and stood by the door reading the plaque as if the letters were shy and needed an audience. Evelyn joined him. Neither spoke. The hum of new lights sounded like summer insects. Outside, the sky considered rain and then decided better of it. She looked at his profile, fewer angles than before or maybe just less guarded, and said, "We're okay." "For now," he answered, which was a realist's prayer. "For now is how forever happens," she said. He nodded as if he were filing that line in a place he kept sentences he might need later. He turned to go. He stopped. "Miss March." "Yes." "Thank you." He left before she could say you're welcome because gratitude is easier to receive when the person who gives it doesn't have to watch you hold it. Years will pass and this will turn into the kind of story people tell simpler than it was. A billionaire almost fell, a librarian saved him, a plan named after a season made money clean. That is not what happened. What happened is this. A woman who had spent a lifetime being the person people forgot stayed, and looked and kept the things safe until a man who had spent a lifetime teaching the world that silence was power remembered that sometimes power is saying one true sentence at the right time. If this story stayed with you, subscribe now so you don't miss the next collision of fate and choice. And tell me, do you believe ordinary people can change the course of empires? Or do empires only pretend to change when someone is watching? Your answer decides what kind of world we make from here.